So with with this in mind, we will be focusing on the user security first. Now there is different layers that we are going to deal with. So I want to get started. I'll just go from left to right. Protecting the identity here is something where we want to, well, actually we have a couple of different options to protect identities. So I want to focus on that first. Obviously, Entra ID has a great role in this. Now, if we look at Entra ID, then what I mentioned earlier is that Entra ID is here Entra ID is here to serve and protect access to what we call different cloud applications. Cloud applications, we actually have different kinds of them. In our case, we will be looking at Exchange. We'll focus on Exchange mostly. So we'll be looking into those Microsoft-based cloud applications. For example, some of them are related to Office. Exchange Online being the first of them, but also you could think about SharePoint Online, OneDrive for Business, Teams, and so on. Now, Entra ID is also here to help protect third-party cloud applications. You may be working with something called Salesforce or Visma. It's quite popular, I know. Or I use, for example, a tool called Sessionize a lot. The idea is that we can use identities managed with Entra ID to sign in into a third-party app. That's basically what we are creating here. So, for example, here we have Sessionize as a third-party application. I've done this demo before. What you'll see is that if I sign in, if I want to sign in into this app, the developers of the application allow different identity providers to be used. In this case, I could use Facebook, Google, Twitter. They have their own database with usernames and passwords, but I can also choose for Microsoft as a sign-in. And in my case, if I use Microsoft as a sign-in, what you will notice here in the top left is my navigation bar. If I open this up, it will take me to login.microsoftonline.com. I can then choose my account. And once I have chosen the account I want to be signing into, I am now signed in, right? So that is how I can do this. That is why we say that third-party applications are also to be protected by Entra ID, and we also support a so-called line of business applications. And those applications are the apps that we are hosting ourselves, or that we are owner of ourselves. Then we have these kind of applications. Now, in our case, the identity is used to sign in into Exchange Online. But if we think about protecting the identity, we are going to be in Entra ID, and we have a couple of things we can work with. Now, first of all, Entra ID supports different kinds of identities. The user identities are representing a person. We also have other identities like groups, which groups people and devices. We have device objects as well. Will be looking at users mostly. There's also service principals. It's kind of a service account for those applications. But in this case, when we have a user sign in, we want to protect this identity. And if you have the proper licenses, then Entra ID offers a very specific set of features for security. If we want to protect our identities, then there is one important component, one important situation we can look at, and that is something called, we have a Microsoft Defender for Identity, which is a Defender product for identities. And that is basically also doing the same thing as something called Entra Identity Protection, or let's just write it down fully, Identity Protection. These are in fact different products, still they do the same thing, and that is protect identities, where Microsoft Defender for Identity, strangely enough, is used for identities stored in traditional Active Directory domain services. Entra identity protection is about protecting your Entra ID-based users, or let's say your Azure Active Directory, because that is what we very often still refer to. Now, what you see in some situations, and you might be in the same, is that you have not only Entra ID, but you probably also still have an old-fashioned Active Directory domain service with a server here that we refer to as a domain controller, right? And then what we typically do is we set up a situation where we are going to set up some kind of a directory sync solution. Now, nowadays we have two solutions for setting up the directory synchronization. One solution is a solution that is called Entra Connect synchronization. This used to be called Azure Active Directory Connect. It's now called Entra Connect Sync. And we have another solution, because Microsoft always has to rename things, and we are suffering from that a lot. We also have another solution now, which is called the Entra Cloud Sync solution. In general, we can say that the Entra Connect Sync is considered to be the full solution. Entra Cloud Sync is the light edition. Major difference is that Connect Sync requires you to configure the tool in your on-prem environment on one of your servers. Entra Cloud Sync is configured in the Entra portal, and the only thing you need on-premise is a little agent that just connects to that Entra ID and the configuration. So it's a little bit different. They are similar, but still different. So they support different situations. If I would dive deeper into this, if you would go and say, hey, let me just do Entra Connect Sync versus Cloud Sync, just Bing it, of course, because Bing is the best. Then what you'll do is here is a little document on the differences. And what I like about this document is that it also has a little table here that will just sort of compare them to each other. So what Connect Sync and Cloud Sync, what do they support? The interesting thing is, at this point, if you look at Connect Sync, it supports a couple of things that are not supported with Cloud Sync. For example, when we think about, let's say, larger groups. So if you have a large group with up to 200,000 and 250,000 members, then Connect Sync supports this, where Cloud Sync doesn't, for example. Other stuff like the hybrid AD join functionality, where a Windows client can be joined in both domains, basically, both Active Directories. We also would be needing the Connect Sync for it and not the Cloud Sync. So, however, in the future, Microsoft is actually trying to go and make sure that the Cloud Sync is going to be the major tool for this, supporting the more options. The reason for this, one major reason for Microsoft to move towards Cloud Sync more, is that Cloud Sync only requires on your on-prem environment an agent, and all the other configuration is done inside the Azure portal. So therefore, when it comes to stability and updates and everything, it makes more sense to get that configuration in Azure and just have on-prem being an agent. So those are differences. Probably in your situation, if you're running this for the last few years, you have Cloud Sync enabled, which doesn't really matter at this point. What I want to mention about the Defender for Identity here is for on-premise Active Directory domain server. So if I want to run this, I will actually have to install the Microsoft Defender for Identity agent. So it's an MDI, Microsoft Defender for Identity agent, needs to be installed, and this is going to this is going to be configured, where it will basically go and it will take all the sign-in information that people do in the on-prem Active Directory, and that will be sent into a Entra located or an Azure located data store. And basically, the idea behind this, so what we have here is something called we have something called an Azure Data Explorer component. The name doesn't really matter at this point, shortened to ADX. Basically, this agent will take the data and will send the data in here. Microsoft Defender for Identity is basically taking the data from Entra ID and puts that data also in that Data Explorer. And an Azure Data Explorer component is a storage location. It's a store which is optimized for analysis. So we store the data in a way that we can start doing all kinds of, well, in this case, machine learning kind of things and AI things to the data. And that is exactly what Defender for Identity and Entra Identity Protection have to offer. So we have, so what we can do is we are going to monitor people's sign-in behavior. And if for some reason people are doing weird things, then we can be notified about this. Looking at this, for example, from Microsoft Entra perspective, if I have users in my organization, and if I let's say I want to show the sign-in logs, what I get to see here is a huge list of how people in my organization are signing in. So I have my own account signing in from where I am now in Leesakker. Well, I'm not in Leesakker, I think, but I'm close. This is where I access the internet. My daughter, I saw here, there's a Windows, using a Windows sign in here, which is my daughter. This is my son signing in, right? So we can see those. They have a computer in my organization too. Yeah, they wanted a computer for school. And I said, well, that's all right. I have two rules. It has to be a Microsoft device, so they both have a Surface device. And the device has to be connected to Intune. They had no idea what they said yes to. But, well, they said yes to it, so now I control their asses when it comes to... well, my kids are... Well, my son is no longer in school. He's working. He's 21. And my daughter is in what it's called, like it's like the next. She's 19, so it's no longer basic schools. It's more specialized into. She's into fashion, so he does fashion school. So here we see all those sign-ins, right? So it's happening, different users. Yesterday I was in my own house working, and that's, you know, Veldhoven is close to where I live. So that's what I get to see then, right? So all this information, but if I look at either one of those sign-ins, let's for example take a sign-in by my daughter here, then what I get to see is she's signing in. It's a Windows sign-in into Azure Active Directory here. I can see all kinds of information about the sign-in, about the location of the sign-in, about the device used to sign in, authentication details here. So she has been signing in using Windows Hello for Business, face recognition. Some conditional access was not applicable in this case. We can see basically a lot of different things about the sign-ins. We write all that information down into that central store. Now, I do not have an on-prem Active Directory in my environment, but if I would have enabled all this, it would also send the data into that Data Explorer. And basically, me looking at this information here is me looking at the content in the Data Explorer. Now, there is for me all kinds of ways to look into this content. One of the ways to look into this content is, for example, by going into monitoring and health. Here I can also open up my sign-in logs, pretty much the same thing, right? So here you can see me signing in into sessionize.com just yet, like this, right? I can see all that stuff. Other than that, we also have, for example, a couple of workbooks. And these workbooks are dashboards that we can sign in. Here we can see, for example, conditional access related workbooks, identity protection related workbooks. identity governance and access, or app sign-in health, or hybrid user monitoring as well. So we can basically, for example, check out the workbook about sign-ins, and this is showing me some sign-in data for the last 5 minutes, right? And then, okay, in this case, we do not get a lot of data back because it might be because of my, let's say I want to check out the last 24 hours. Maybe we may get some more information back here, right? We can see people signing in. We can see, hey, where are those people? Let's sign in heat map. So where is the user been signing in? So now I'm kind of curious, what if I take the last 30 days? I have been traveling a little bit. So here I can see a couple of different sign-ins that we are actually finding in. Actually, there's also one location which is called unknown. They just put it on the edge of the map. So we don't know where that went, where that was. United States, we have like United Kingdom, Liechtenstein, Norway. Well, there's different locations that I could be looking into, as you can see. So different operating systems being used, Windows, iOS stuff, Android, OS X stuff. So you can, this is actually quite nice because this gives a great deal of information how people have been signed in. So this basically proves we have a lot of information here. Also, when we think about usage and insights, we can see, for example, what Microsoft Entra-based application are we using? For example, the active, so how are we signing in and what kind of multi-factor authentication method are we going to be, has been used in the organization? So we do have all that information is here, right? So all the information is just here for us to look at. Per app, we can even view the sign-in activity, right? So people signing in into Microsoft apps or third-party apps, it's all here, and we can check out the sign-in activity, the success rate here, failed sign-ins, for example. So we see all that stuff. That is information about signing in. But based on that information, we have identity protection, where we can start protecting our users. So here I have a product called identity protection, and I can see that I have, for example, 21 different attacks blocked on this environment in the last, what is it, in the last 7 months. You can view those attacks if they're recent. The number of users protected. Here we can see, for example, some risky activities by location. So you can see, hey, how have my users been signing in risky ways? So apparently one time in the United States, I had a risky sign in where the risk level was high. I can also look for risk level medium if there's anything, or risk level low if there's anything. Here we have a low risk level sign-ins in the United Kingdom. So we can basically check do those sign-in, so risky sign-ins out like this. The attacks in my tenant. So what kind of attacks did we see and how many did we block? For example, here access using a valid account or access obfuscating access using proxies. How many did we see of that? So we do get some nice overviews again, like, hey, what have been happening when it comes to protecting our identities? But what you'll also get to see here is that based on that analysis data, we can see, for example, users being at risk. So in my case, I can see that at this point, I have one user that is at risk. I had to go to low risk view as well. So this user is at low risk. We can open this up. You can see, for example, well, this is a user. It's a limited administrator. It is at risk at low level. Some information about the user in this case. Risky sign-ins. Now, the data that we get to see is a little bit limited to a certain time frame. So I can only see the last month here. And my risky sign-in that my risk level has been based upon is a little bit older than that. However, if I want to, I can if I want to create another risky sign-in. What I can do is use a Tor browser, navigate to anywhere else on the world, and then see if I can sign in into that environment. I will be using an anonymous IP address if I use a browser like this. Very well. To Microsoft 365, this is going to be considered a risky sign-in. Detections not linked to a sign-in for the user. The risk history, we can see what we have seen over time with this user. So one time I was at medium level, then I confirmed to be safe, and now I am at low risk level. Just like this, so I can see the users being at risk. I can also see the risky sign-ins themselves. So what kind of risky sign-ins have we been looking into? And what I will be doing is I'm going to change my filters a little bit to let's say 1 month to see if I can get any data out of this. I might see a few risky sign-ins once this is updated. The idea behind this is it will tell me that we have seen some kind of activity that we consider to be weird. In the meantime, here is my Tor browser. So let's say if I want to go to Microsoft 365.com, I'm now connecting to a location. The Tor browser is going to create some kind of a round tour around the globe for me to access that application. So this browser is connecting to some kind of a proxy, another proxy, and another proxy. And now I'm connecting to Microsoft365.com. So I'm pretty much hiding my location here. And one of the things I can do, if I still want to sign in, then I can always try, right? I can always go and say, hey, this is my username, and this is my username. Let's do my multi-factor authentication thingy. In my case, it actually thinks that I'm in Germany now, right? So that's even more interesting. And then I am going to sign in. Now, what I have set up is a policy. I've set up a policy that will block this kind of activity, right? And that is exactly the purpose of identity protection. If a sign-in is successful but weird, for example, might be signing in from a different browser, application, or location that is, well, not known to us, then I will not allow the sign-in here. I deny anonymous IP addresses, which is one thing. However, Microsoft Defender for identity or intra-identity protection, they do more. So anonymous sign-ins is something we can block. Also, like impossible travel activities, we're looking at that too. But also, if a user's identity has been compromised, his username and password are for sale on the dark web. We will also be monitoring that, and we will then also block those accounts. Basically, mhm. Ja. Ja. Oh ja. Yeah. Yeah, that's using the same technology. Yeah. So here we see those risky sign-ins, right? So here I did a couple of different risky sign-ins. So I get to see user, in this case me, an IP address, the location in this example, and we can see that I dismissed it, right? So most of them I dismissed. But if I check out one of them, let's say I'm taking this one into Greater London, then here we can see some information, Microsoft Graph, command line tools, device info, Edge, Windows 10, risk info. We can see that we found some, in this example, unfamiliar sign-in properties, right? So with that, we see things that we don't see very often for that user. That is why we block this, right? So the user passed multi-factor authentication, so that worked, but we are using some kind of a client that typically this user is not being used, right? So the following properties of this sign-in are unfamiliar for the given user. It's the browser, it's the device, the IP address, the Exchange Active Sync ID, and the tenant IP subnet that I'm connecting to. So all kinds of things that we could go and say, hey, this is indeed a risk. So indeed, MFA worked. Conditional access was applied, right? MFA for all is the conditional access policy that I want to run here. So maybe some other things here. However, still seen as a risky sign-in. So here we can also go into the risk detections if there's any for, in this case, let's say the last 90 days. We have a different ways to look at the same data basically. Maybe also add this in. And we can be looking into a certain request ID because that is what I'm now focusing on, that one single thing that I was looking at here. But just like that, we have all this information here. And as you can see, we are allowed to block this kind of access. Now, there is an option here to use a sign-in risk policy and a user risk policy here. However, you can see in my case, I have both of them disabled, but it still works, right? So that's weird, but it's not weird because Microsoft has sort of told me that I should not configure it here. Here in the top, it says use conditional access for that. So basically what I did is I went into conditional access. I created a conditional access policy, and somewhere here, it would say block risky sign-in. This is the one I created. And if I check out this specific conditional access policy, I get to see that if any of my users connecting to any of my cloud apps, anything, right? Connecting anywhere or any one of the cloud apps, if the sign-in risk is either medium or high, right? That is what I want to block. If this is the case, then block access, right? That's my policy. So therefore, instead of setting up the policy straight from identity protection, I do it from somewhere else, right? So I do it from conditional access. The interesting thing here may be, so if you look at this, then when we talk about identity protection, we talk about Entra identity protection, but also Defender for Identity. But for some reason, Defender for Identity in here is not being mentioned, right? So I'm in Identity. I see some user stuff, some group stuff, devices, applications are here as well. Let's see, then we have administrators and some billing and settings, and here we do have protection and identity protection, but that is the identity protection bit, right? So we have all that stuff here. We also have these different categories from this side, but that's basically pointing towards the same solution here. So if we look at this, we don't really get to see extra options for on-prem stuff other than here hybrid management, but this basically allows me to configure either Cloud Sync or Connect Sync, right? That's the options that we have at this point to configure, but it doesn't really tell me about, it doesn't really show me anything related to on-premise integrations. We do have, however, something called the Identity Secure Score. The Identity Secure Score is going to show me how many identity security related situations I have been implementing and what I can still change in order to get a higher level of security. So this is a set of recommendations that I can just go in and dive into in order to get a better level of security. Interestingly, I haven't seen it before, but it's here. A new secure score experience is available. Check it out here. So let's just check it out here. Okay. Probably way better, I guess. Well, interestingly enough, it tells me what recommendations I can follow and what kind of license I would need for that, right? And well, identity plan 2, Entra plan 2 is something that you hope you have because that will get you the identity protection bit and so on.
Good thing you fall from 90% now to 16.
Uh, whoa, yeah. So, so wait a second. So I'm going to use this one because now I have a secure score for identity 90.68%. And what you mentioned in the new portal, I have 60. What? Okay, there is this. Well, this is in preview probably. Huh? Still, by the way, we don't have the defender for identity thing, which is kind of interesting. However, if I go into my where I always forget where I have to be for this. So if I go in, oh yeah, I have to go into Defender, defender.microsoft.com, because that is where all the Defender products are. This is also where we will be looking into Defender for Office and so on. But if we look at this point, and if it's fast enough, then here we do have something for identities, right? And here we have a dashboard, which is kind of cool, by the way, because it shows all kinds of moving things. Huh? But this will show like, hey, this is the identity threat detection and response. Whoa. Huh? Identity threat detection and response dashboard, showing, for example, the amount of cloud users, on-prem users, or hybrid users. Now, don't be afraid of this value here, because if I check Entra ID in my organization, if I check out my list of users, you can see I have 23 of them, right? In this portal, it says I have 1123. So you could question where are those 1100 users coming from? But the 1100 users that we're looking at are also service principals used by applications and such, right? So it's like app kind of service accounts, and those are we have a lot in Azure. So basically, what we can do is we can click that link, and this will take me into a environment where I can run Custo query language queries. And here you can see that I have a little bit more results. And these are basically all my objects that we have. And some of them are, for example, an account that is related to, in this case, rights management services. Or there is, if I scroll a little bit further down, let's just go and take any one of this list. Here, I have one that is related to an exact service account. And just like that, we have so many different of those service accounts because we have way more than just the users. We also have service principals. But from here, hey, my identity secure score is 90.68% again, so I'm happy. And this is a dashboard that will actually help me understand threat detection and response for identities a little bit better. Like, for example, which are my high privileged identities in the organization? So users with a lot of, well, in this case, global admin permissions. How did my secure score change over time? Defender for identity deployment. So, hey, what do you need to do in order to implement Defender for identity? Identity related incidents. Here we see some useful guides from this side. There's a user at risk, at low risk at this point, which is my user object, for example. So that is what we can see. We can monitor some health issues when it comes to my situation for Defender for Identity or the tools implemented. So how are we going to deploy all this stuff? And here in the system settings, we also have Microsoft Defender for Identity settings to implement this solution to, for example, deploy that agent towards our domain controllers that we may be running. So the sensors here. If I want to add a new sensor, I need to download to install it, put it on a domain controller, and this is the access key that we are going to configure there in order to have this sensor you install on the domain controller send the information into this system so we can start using that data, right? So there's a lot of extra things going on this point. One of the cool things we can do in the on-prem environment is set up a honey token account. So you can basically go and tag a user that is on-prem as a honey token, make it look fancy. Don't do anything with it, but if any hacker tries to do anything with it, you will be alerted about this. And then you know, hey, this is not me, someone else, so I need to, well, start thinking about disconnecting things or protecting monitoring the information. So this is an interesting one. You can also tell which machines in my organization are Exchange servers. If you have any, you may want to implement this as well. Set up notifications here. And then, well, make sure that we have the Defender for Identity configuration set up for your on-prem environment. This might be really interesting to at least extend this data set here with all the extra information, right? Because the more data you're gathering about identities, especially if you have hybrid identities where users have an on-prem account that is also synced into Entra, right? So the attack surface on these accounts are larger. Especially for the on-prem environment, we very often are successful by just signing in with a username and password still. So tricky. Therefore, well, this might be an interesting step to take at the user level. At the user level. Obviously, conditional access is also going to protect our apps here, but that we will discover when we get back from lunch.